The A-League final series. We have our top six. The order is set. We've watched the games, come here, talk about it, who's doing well, who's doing bad. So we're going to give our best crack at previewing and predicting the finals bracket here tonight. So first up, of course, are our elimination finals. Sydney FC versus the Mararthur Bulls and Melbourne Victory versus Melbourne City. The Melbourne Derby on Sunday afternoon. Jacob, I'm going to let you take your pick. Pick one of these games. How do you think it's going to play out, and who's going to get the chocolates?
Let's go with the Melbourne Derby because that's a fun one. I see Victory winning that. It's pretty easy for somebody to say, Victory will win that because they've been the better team this season. But you've got to remember as well with derby games, anything goes there. With City, McLaren's scored a goal in that last game for them. Has he found form again? City, I think, are a team that have a lot of really good pieces but haven't been able to put it all together at the same time this season. They've got the likes of Tolgay Arslan in the centre of the park who's been absolutely outstanding. Jamie McLaren, who's not been able to really find any form, and he's not played a hell of a lot because he's been on the bench. Matthew Leckie was injured early on. Even the likes of Leo Natel and Jackalish were, they find themselves in good positions and then they just struggle with that end product. So I think it's a case of, City it's not even an inconsistency thing. It's just that they just haven't really got going. And I think that if they do get going, they can be a really big threat here. So I don't think that it's, necessarily a done deal for Victory here. I do think that they'll be up against it. And, City, they've got a couple of players now. McLaren's obviously leaving. Curtis Good, it's announced, he'll be leaving as well at the end of his contract. So they've got players here who this is going to be their last chance to fight for a championship with City. And, they could that could put a lot onto those players and give them that boost that they need to really get things going. But I do see Victory winning that one. I think with the sort of form that Daniel Arzani is in, he's been absolutely electric the last few weeks. And I think if Popovic can continue to get him on the ball and continue to play to his strengths, then, Victory are almost unstoppable. And they've had a very good backline so far this season as well. There were a lot of games, obviously, in that middle part of the season we were talking about. They were drawing a lot, but that's actually a credit to their defence because they didn't ship that one goal more and end up losing them, and it kept them, in that title fight almost until second or third final week. So, they've got a really strong defence against a City team that's been spluttering all season long. So I think that they'll probably get it done in the end of the day.
And to jump on that point about the defence as well, I think we talked about this last week that the personnel, that back four is very key as well. And I went back and looked at some of the numbers. And when Melbourne Victory have Jason Guerrier, Damien De Silva, Rod McMiranda, and Adama Traore, their preferred back four in the team, they only lost one game all season, and that was courtesy of a 95th minute own goal for Rod McMiranda against Wellington Phoenix. So they don't lose games with that back four, and they've never been beaten this season by more than one goal as well. So I put forward the case that Victory won't lose this game unless it goes to penalties. I just think that the back four is so solid, and they've done pretty well even when they aren't in there. But Christian, I'm leaning towards the Victory. I think they'll get it done in regular time. But Melbourne City, they've had, 3 of these 7-8 goal wins, something like that throughout the season. So if you catch them on a good day, they're scary. And in a derby, you never know.
Yeah, I'm just judging off, the past 3 derbies this season. There's all been extremely tight, closely contested affairs. I think Victory but maybe either extra time or penalties. I think it's going to go the distance. Just like I said, I think it's going to be, extremely close. I mean, Jacob and I had this argument on the last pod about what do we worry most about the Victory? Is it the defence and the ability to maybe lose a lapse in concentration here or there in moments during a game, or is it the lack of finishing in front of goal, which you've touched on basically all season long? I do agree with Jacob that, the attack, that could be an area where this could really cost Victory, especially given how many goals City have scored in these past few weeks. Have they started to click into gear now? Obviously, McLaren getting back into form, as Jacob's touched on as well. It is a scary proposition, and this Victory defence, with that back four that you did say, Lockie, they've obviously only lost one game all season, but have they been cohesive all season? There's been a bit of chopping and changing, throughout the season. Popovic had to plug in a few holes here and there. So, yeah, obviously it's elimination final. You can't make any mistakes. It's the old cliche, but you just can't in these types of moments. But in saying that, I do expect Victory to get it done. I think Fornaroli has a massive game here. He's going to step up when it matters most. And yeah, in front of that Victory crowd, we know how much they mean to the club. I think, they'll get it done. Just.
Of course, the additional context to that back four conversation, which I don't think we mentioned because the news came out on Tuesday, is that Jason Guerrier has his ban reduced from 2 games to 1. So he will be available, and they will have their preferred back four. Paletti, give us your quick tip for this one and then move us on to Sydney MacArthur.
So, in recent memory, there's only been one side that's won this fixture 6-0 and 7-0. That being said, there's also been 4 scoreless draws in the A-League men's competition this season, and 2 of them have been in the Melbourne Derby. I've got City doing it. I think it's going to go to extra time. I think Melbourne Victory have just been so hit and miss this season. And I say that the only consistency with Victory is the fact that they keep drawing games. And that just gives me the vibe that this game's just going to go to extra time. And I think the class of City might just be able to outdo it. I think they'll want to send Jamie McLaren out on a high. I think they'll want to send Curtis Good out on a high. You can't underestimate how much that do it for your teammates camaraderie just can lift a side that may not have it. And this isn't your typical 3v6 matchup because both sides play out of this stadium. They'll know every inch of that turf. I think that this is going to be City in extra time or penalties. And then we're going to move on to, as you said, Sydney and MacArthur. I got MacArthur, but with no conviction whatsoever. I think that the last time they played at the Sydney Football Stadium, it was a 2-0 victory to MacArthur. I believe Sydney went down to 10 in that game in the first half. The last 3 fixtures have seen MacArthur win by an aggregate scoreline of 6-0. I think the fact that they just did it with 9 against Sydney FC will play into that a lot more than I think a lot of people might anticipate. I remember sitting in the stadium for that a couple of weeks ago. I was in the press box, and once they went down to 9, it just felt like, right, Sydney are going to get a goal, and they did until it came back for offside. So, and then MacArthur just really sort of rallied and stopped Sydney from doing anything. As good as Uffy has been at the helm for Sydney FC since taking over very early in the season for Corica, there have been times this season when Sydney have struggled. And I think the Perth Glory game is going to fill a lot of people with a false confidence about it because, as I think Christian has said, I know Robbie Thompson has said, it really has been pathetic Perth. Or was it Daniel McBreen that said that on A-League off air? It was one of the two. Apologies to whichever one. Or maybe it was both of them. I don't know. Anyway, moving swiftly back to our podcast.
You kept trying to get us on different podcasts today.
Yeah.
I think that game's going to fill a lot of people with a lot of false confidence. Sydney FC have received a number of red cards this season, in the first half. I don't know. I just think that the way Milos Dojovski has this side playing, I know they just went down 3-0 to Wellington, but Wellington away is always a tough trip, particularly this season with the way that Giancarlo Italiano has his side setting up at home. I just think the matchup favours MacArthur just a little bit more than Sydney. But as I said, I say this with absolutely no confidence. This could very much be a, toss of the coin, pick 'em, have your fun.
Looking at this game, I think MacArthur, to be honest, are the only team in the top 6 that I feel can't go on and win the whole thing. I don't have that belief that they could do it for 4 games in a row. Perhaps they do it against Sydney. They have beaten them twice this year in very difficult circumstances, but I think that win with 9 men is really going to rev Sydney up. They're not going to let that happen again. And whilst the Bulls have been a bogey team for the Sky Blues, I have Tala getting them into shape and getting it done. Christian, what about you?
So the stat that actually caught me by surprise that I saw today was MacArthur actually lead against Sydney. It's a combined scoreline of 6-0 in the past 3 meetings. So I was like, wow, I did not expect that. So I think, this upcoming matchup is so tough to preview because I just think this result depends on which MacArthur side shows up on the night because, they've shown this season that they can play on the counter-attack with quick transition. They can take the game to you. Perhaps not over the course of the game, but they have their moments and they can also suck the life out of the game like we saw when they went down to 9 men and they got the result against Sydney. But in saying that, they just haven't put the whole package together. So I'm just going to go with Sydney only just because of their recent form and, the good football that they're producing this season. But yeah, it's going to be very tight.
And of course, of MacArthur's last 3 games, the loss came with De Villa in the team, and the wins came with De Villa out of the team and receiving red cards, Jacob. Maybe that's the secret.
Maybe it is, but they'd be pretty foolish to not play De Villa in such an important game. But no, I'm with you too. I'd have Sydney winning it. I just think that the style of football that Sydney play is tailor-made for finals football. It's very boom or bust, and that's kind of what you need in finals football. Is if you're going to be on it, you're going to win it, and as nobody can even get close to you. Obviously there's a lot of risk in the style of football that they do play, and Christian, you touched on that MacArthur have looked good on the counter at times in those transitional phases of play. But I'm just crazy, but I do believe that the sort of, high pressing sort of gonzo football that Sydney like to play, or have shown that they like to play this season, I think that's sort of tailor-made for these games where, there's a lot of pressure on both teams. And, if you're pressing the team as high and as intensely as Sydney do, you're just opening up the chance for mistakes for the opposition to creep in. And I think that's where, that ever decisive moment might come from.
Okay, so Paletti's in their own little bubble. They've got a different set of semi-finals, and then Jacob, Christian and myself have the Mariners versus Sydney and Wellington versus Victory. Let's do both at the same time. Mariners-Sydney, I think, is really interesting because we've talked about the fact that Mariners lost those first 4 games. Since then, they've only lost 2 the rest of the season, but they've both been to Sydney FC. So that's going to be a hell of a matchup if that eventuates. I back Mark Jackson over 2 legs. On the emotional side of me, just wants to believe in this Mariners story as well. I hope that Jackson will have learnt from those 2 games where they lost against the Sky Blues. And I think over 2 legs, I'm giving them the edge. And with those blowouts from Sydney, we've never seen them back it up. So I just think over the 180 minutes, the Mariners will have the strength. And in terms of Wellington Victory, unfortunately, that might lead to a little bit of a boring tie there because we've seen them have, a 1-1 draw with the Knicks not having a shot on target, and then a 95th minute winner for the Wellington to get over the line. So I'm going to give the edge to Wellington. I back them over 180 minutes as well, the way they like to play in pairs. So I'm sending the Mariners and the Wellington Phoenix through to my grand final. Christian?
Yeah, I just see Sydney as a bogey team for the Mariners, like you touched on. Obviously, those 2 defeats of the Mariners coming at the hands of Sydney, 5-1 combined scoreline. So I just think it's a bad matchup for the Mariners. Like Jacob touched on before, the high press, I think the Mariners might get caught out on 1 or 2 occasions. So I've got Sydney there going through in maybe perhaps a slight upset to many people. And then the other semi-final, I've got the Phoenix just solely based on going into New Zealand in the second leg. I just don't think Victory will do enough at home in the opening leg to take anything back over there and to make a real sort of fight of it.
Tickets already selling like hotcakes, by the way, for that game in a couple of weeks' time. Jacob, where do you see it?
Yeah, so I'm with Christian for both of them. I see Sydney and Wellington going through. Same reasoning for that Sydney Mariners matchup is just that Sydney have had the upper hand over the Mariners this season, and I know that MacArthur have had the sort of advantage over Sydney, but I do think that, again, I'm a firm believer in the sort of football that Sydney have been playing, and I absolutely love it. So maybe this is just a little bit of heart over the head sort of thing, but yeah, I've backed them to do it. And look, it's not going to be an easy fixture for them, but I mean, that home leg for the Mariners is the second leg, so I think if Sydney can get a decent lead and carry that into the second leg, then the Mariners could be under a lot of pressure. And we saw with games, the second leg against Abdi Shatar, for instance, it took them a while to really get into that, and they needed a goal to win it. So I think that if they're sort of in that same situation again, they could struggle, and that's where Sydney get up. And then Wellington, well, we were saying on the live stream that they just don't lose at home. So I think that Victory are going to really, really struggle in that second leg, and Wellington, yeah, I've given them the advantage there, and they'll go through for the final.
All right, and then Paletti, what's happening in your little parallel universe?
So I've got Wellington beating MacArthur over the 2 legs. MacArthur just do not match up well with Wellington. I don't think they ever have in MacArthur's short history in the league. There might be a couple of games that I'm kind of blending all together, but I don't think they've ever really matched up well tactically, stylishly, depending, like even different coaches. It's just, I don't know, just something about that fixture just always seems to go the favour of the Knicks. So I think over 2 legs, that's fine. For the Mariners, I think we touched on it a little bit earlier. They've played over 40 games this season. I think that eventually the petrol just has to run out of the tank. And at $2.30 a litre, I just don't know if the Mariners can afford to refill at the moment on their shoestring budgets. Maybe if they win the AFC Cup, they can afford to refill.
Yeah.
But I just think, touching back onto what I touched on in the first leg, I think that if City do beat the Victory, and I think they will, that this idea of trying to send McLaren and Curtis Good out a winner, as well as what I expect will probably be some other departures. It seems like just with those two leaving, City just look like they're going to go into some sort of rebuild. And so I can imagine there's going to be a few players leaving the club, but we'll obviously have to wait for the club to confirm that. So I think that City will beat the Mariners over the two legs. It'll be a very close, very tight contest, probably maybe like a 3-2 on aggregate, a 2-1 sort of vibe. Is low scoring. It's going to be intriguing football to watch. Is probably the best way to put that. So yeah, I've got Wellington versus Melbourne City in the grand final, and I think that Wellington are going to sell out the cake tin, and Alex Paulson's going to get the Joe Marston medal for a double-digit save performance in like a 1-0, 2-0 sort of victory. And what would be hilarious is if the APL just decide to play this game in Sydney anyway.
I thought, no, we've gone back on that. Not happening. Interesting, Paletti, because my grand final is Central Coast versus Wellington. I also have Alex Paulson as my Joe Marston medalist. Now, I think looking back to the game that they did play at Gosford a couple of weeks ago, you just look at the tactics and how they set up. It's going to be a tight game. It's not going to be a blowout either way. That's just not going to happen with these two managers. So I think a couple of moments that didn't fall the Phoenix's way in that game, I think they're going to this time. Alex Paulson's going to come up big with a couple of saves, and I think that'll be enough to make him, I believe, just the third goalkeeper to win the Joe Marston medal after Matty Ryan and Lawrence Thomas. Let's go to Jacob first. You guys have the same grand final.
Yeah. Sorry.
I didn't say who was going to win. I think Wellington's going to win. I think Alex Paulson's going to come up clutch, win the Joe Marston medal, and they're going to get it done by no more than a goal, potentially in extra time.
But no, so on to my final, and the same one as Christian. It's Wellington-Sydney. As Paletti said, Wellington will pack out Sky Stadium, and it'll be just fantastic to watch, I reckon. Two teams that obviously very, very different from each other in the ways that they like to play, especially Wellington at home. As we know, they like to stay quite strong defensively and solid. And as I said before, they just never look like losing at home. And so I do have them probably a 1 or a 2-0. I think it'll be a pretty close run affair, and I think Sydney will be in it for the most part. But my Joe Marston medalist is who, just completely pure, just throwing it out there, I'm just saying it's going to be Costa Barbarouses. I think he's the sort of player that could really hurt Sydney on the counter-attack, and I reckon he could get a goal against his former club, put the nail in the coffin, win it for the Phoenix.
Yeah, I've gone for Phoenix to win as well. I think they'll have just a bit too much for Sydney in the end. Home crowd will just be massive for them. Just hopefully a sellout there we see. And then for the Joe Marston medal, I've gone for Costa Barbarouses as well. So Jacob's probably me there.
Great minds think alike.
Barbarouses has actually scored in both of the previous meetings with Sydney this season, which is interesting. So I just think this award goes to a forward who impacts the game in that way. I think he'll make a massive difference. So trying to pick Sydney apart in those 1 or 2 key moments, and he's been brilliant this season, as is the whole squad. But I just think, the award will go to him.
So Christian's taking the embodiment here of work smarter, not harder, because he can't get his own predictions right, so he's just piggybacking.
Okay, for total transparency, I made everyone submit their predictions anonymously earlier in the day, so there was no copying going on whatsoever. I had mine submitted. Yeah, I had mine submitted before I saw anyone else's, so it's all above board. Unlike the predictions game, that's turned into a bit of a Wild West.
Jacob Slacken,
Nick the predictions. All right, well, there you go. There are our paths to the finals, and we've all picked the Phoenix as the champions, haven't we? So there are a couple of different routes.
So that means Melbourne Victory are going to win.
Yeah, absolutely. It's never going to happen. Apologies, Perth Glory.